Okay. Thank you very much for this invitation. To me, it's a pleasure and honor to share with distinguished author and scholar to do a little reminder from different capitals. I mean Washington, D.C., Moscow, and Havana, what they call from the missile crisis. I try to use my technique as journalist and historian to try to put why we call different names the same event. From Russian point of view, they call Caribbean crisis or Caribsky crisis. That's maybe for geographical point of view. They was far away from Moscow, across the ocean. And from the United States, it was a missile crisis, because that's a weapon that made then. And for Cuba, it was the October crisis, or Crisis de Octubre, just related to the time, but not maybe the time on the calendar for the time, apocalyptic times. When you try to look in the, for example, Amazon.com, just for the missile crisis, you have more than 3,000 books. One of them, the first, was the Robert Kennedy. 13 days, the last one, was the Svetlana Sabranska, will be present in the few days. I think it's available for selling.
Yeah, right now it is.
He's right now, eh? Okay, thank you. We have not just Cuban, American, or Russian, or the Soviet at that time, author who take a look about the crisis. Even the Canadian did his homework, or England. We have here example of the books of them. This is the major protagonists, Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev and Anastas Ivanovich Mikoyan, who in that memoir wrote about it. Anastas Mikoyan, who's the son Sergo Mikoyan, who was his translator for many years. He was a very famous scholar, Latino-Americanist. He was the director of the Institute of Latin America and chief editor of the monthly magazine, Latinskaya America. On his help, we will see what the new details about the crisis. Another Soviet, after Russian scholar, Georgy Arbatov, in his memoir, he described the displacement of missiles in Cuba not just as the miscalculation of Nikita Khrushchev, but also as a crime. And he reminded that Mikoyan and Otto Kuzynin, another member of the Presidium that was at that time Politburo, was against that measure. But Nikita Khrushchev even don't give any information. His closest advisor, Fyodor Burlatsky, or Anatoly Dobrinin, who was at that time the Soviet ambassador in Moscow. In Washington, that's right. Other memoirs from the Soviet and the Russian author help to understood, with Anatoly Dobrinin, Burlatsky. This is the Cuban author who wrote just a few books, just five or six. That's the memoir from Carlos Lechuga, who was the Cuban ambassador in United Nations at that time, and the scholar Tomas Diaz Castro. And right now, we'll be reprinting one of the Cuban military and historical, Ruben Jimenez, who in the last month publishing in Granma every Saturday the charter of his book. The last remainder when the Castro did about the missile crisis was in the August late 2010, and he said that he accepted the Soviet missile in Cuba as a sacrifice. That was his meeting with his son and the director of technical and scientific department on the Ministry of Foreign, the Ministry of Arms, Defense. One of the most famous Russian authors was Dmitry Volkogonov, who was the Colonel General, head of the political directory in the Ministry of Defense, who he was the very good access to the Russian archives, and he found in his research the exactly time when the Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev told his Ministry of Defense, Radion Malinovsky, about the idea to place in Cuba missiles. And he asked him, Radion, a что если запустить в штаны американцев нашего Йошера? That means, what if you put our hedgehog into Americans' pants? That was exactly the idea what Nikita Khrushchev wanted to put in the Americans' pants, the rockets. The place was Cuba. Khrushchev later asked about that Andrei Gromyko, who was the Soviet foreign minister, Ambassador Alexander Alexeyev, was the real last name was Chitov, and the other Soviet general, but which were just simply to reaffirm his decision. The general Isa Pliev, that was Michael Dobbs' short, he was the head of the operation of Anadir, and as he reminded, in June 1962, he was in charge for the Caucasian, North Caucasian military district, and he ordered his troops to open fire in the peaceful demonstration. 7 of these demonstrations were shot after the puppet trial and just rehabilitated posthumously in 1996. That's the monument of Rembrandt, the Novocherkask protest. Even the President Putin lied his condolence to the family. That was a very interesting moment when the Gromyko and Dobrynin, ambassador and the foreign minister, meet with President Kennedy in October 18. No mention about the crisis, no mention about the missiles. All the time, the TASS, with the Soviet at the time agency news, tried to all the time deny the presence in Cuba of the missiles, the rockets, or the nuclear weapons. At that time, the president or chairman of the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, was Newton Minow, and he ordered at that time all American radio station and television broadcasting the President Kennedy speech of October 22 at 7 p.m. Who supervised the broadcasting from the foreign countries, or Radio Free Euro or Radio Liberty at that time, was Tom Sorensen, the brother of Ted Sorensen. All the information regarding missile crisis was broadcasting through Voice of America or Radio Free Euro, Radio Liberty, with the total power of 4 million watts. And they received exactly for the Ted Sorensen all this information to his brother. I want to mention the missile crisis was very deeply impacted, not just in the Cuban, Americans, Russian, but I want to mention two persons who that event have very deeply impact in his political and academical point of view. In Madame Secretary was the memoir of Madeleine Albright, and she stated that the missile crisis for her has shown the life and death stakes involving, and that's why she tried to understand the mystery of the Soviet system. And Condoleezza Rice, she said that the bloody dictator Fidel Castro, whom I remember mostly for his decision to place Soviet short-sighted missile aimed the United States on his territory. Even today, we have a person and treat that country who the missile crisis impact their life. In the recent year, as Carlos Gutierrez mentioned, we have a few examples of the crisis in political and diplomacy area that people remind the missile crisis in Cuba in 1962. In 1997, in Cyprus, the government buy from Russia the S-3 missile system, And the Turkey was again that move, and even they trade capers to do a quarantine similar as the President Kennedy did in 1962. Struve Talbot, who was Undersecretary of State when he visited Moscow in 1999, at that time the Prime Minister Sergei Stepashin threw trade hand with the similar situation around Kosovo, and the Soviet troops was there, and the NATO's operation around that situation. The President Vladimir Putin, during his visit to Portugal in 2007, made a similar statement regarding Cuban Missile Crisis and the deployment of shield in Poland and Czech Republic. And right now we have the Iran crisis, what the people talk about it, everybody in the media or the political in the United States, the example on the simulatory. The management of the crisis is one of the examples of the classic example of crisis resolution. And I think that's very important to understand how two different persons with two different characters, with two different mentality, come to the common platform and make agreement, even when at that time they have a different feelings about each other, and that was the case with Kennedy and Khrushchev. Right now, in former Soviet countries, such as Ukraine, Moldavia, or Russia, they have the Association of Veterans who served in Cuba that called Grupa Sowieskich Wojennych Specjalistów na Kubie, or GESPCA. They have website, they have this association who meet almost every year on this date, on October, and share the information and share their memory. And this is about the Soviet soldier training under the PALF. That's about the church, what the Michael Dobbs talk about, the same church for everybody. This is officers. This is the pilots who live in better condition than the soldiers. This is a unique photograph with the Soviet soldier went to the nuclear war wearing suit and tie for bobs. It's very, it's very Russian at that. This is the two interesting photography. I never know until I saw that picture is the woman who together with the soldier to that mission. They go as a cookers and for the platoon or battalion, and of course officers go to the capital in Havana at that time. This is the Soviet soldier on pilots in San Julian, and the Il-20A jet bombers. And this is the last one where I want to show. This is the first in September 1960 when they go to Cuba, and in November 1962 when they go back to the Soviet Union. This is the Soviet Marine without shirts, and there with chapka. That means it's the winter time with winter clothes. This is the beginning of the crisis at the end of the crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.